lines through Tallahassee. What they're doing here is they're establishing the center point of a grid, sort of a checkerboard, if you will, that will overlay the entire state of Florida. These two lines in red shown here, first we have the principal meridian, the line that runs north and south through Tallahassee, and that is to measure points east and west, depending on how far east or west you are from that line. And then we have the base parallel, sometimes called the baseline, that runs east and west through Tallahassee, and that helps us measure points north and south, depending on how far north or south of that baseline you are. Now, the government survey actually sets forth a grid here that you can see, kind of a checkerboard, the center of which is Tallahassee. And every 6 miles east and west of the principal meridian, they drew another line there, a survey line. And then every 6 miles north and south of the baseline, they established another line. And so every square that you see here that overlays a portion of the state of Florida represents an area 6 miles square, or 36 square miles. Now, before we move along with this, the government survey is the basis for all surveys in Florida, and it's also useful in locating navigable water bodies when dealing with water rights issues. Okay, now we want to define a township here for a moment and range. Now, if you will notice on the map we just showed you, each square that we said is 6 miles square, here on this slide, we have the same two lines. We have the principal meridian going north and south and the baseline east and west. And where those squares on the checkerboard intersect, those areas, 6 miles square, are called townships. But a township is described by two designations. The first designation in describing a township is always the north or south designation. And then the second designation is the east or west designation. So let's give an example of how this works. Look at your black square on your slide. And as you can see, first we have to determine how far north or south we are from the baseline. So in this example, we are in the very first tier north of the baseline. So that would put us in Township 1 North. And then running from the principal meridian, we are in the first tier west of that line. So that would put us in Range 1 West. So by giving these two bits of info, Township 1 North, Range 1 West, we define that township. And you'll notice quickly that by giving that township designation, we have reduced the entire state of Florida, millions of acres of land, down to a 36 square mile area. So you see how efficient this is and how useful it is in describing property. Now look at the blue square next. Again, going north or south first, we determined that we have to come 2 tiers down from the baseline to be in the blue square. So that would put us in Township 2 South. And then we have to go 3 tiers over from the principal meridian, and that would put us in Range 3 East. So the blue square, the township, would be described as Township 2 South, Range 3 East. Finally, the gray square, we have to go 3 clicks down from the baseline, which puts us in Township 3 South, and then we go 3 clicks over from the meridian, which puts us into Range 3 West. So this is how you define a township. It's a very efficient system, and it has worked very well for a long time. Now, within a township, a normal township, and I'll describe that more in a minute, in a normal township, there are 36 equal sections, and as you'll notice in this slide, they are laid out in a particular order. Section 1 begins up in the northeast corner, and then you run over and down per that example, and finally you end up with Section 36 down the southeast quarter. each one of these sections is theoretically 1 mile square or 1 square mile. So, and when you have a section that is not broken up into irregular portions by large water bodies or maybe government land grants, things of that nature, then you divide a section into these, you divide a township into these 36 equal sections. Now, once you give a section number, let's say that you identify section 1, township 1 north, range 1 east, you have now broken the state of Florida down from millions of acres down into one 640-acre parcel that is 1 mile square. So it works very well and it serves its intended purpose. Now, of course, within a section, just like we mentioned earlier that with a lot, you can divide a lot by fractions. You could describe the northeast quarter of section 1 or the south half of section 1, or you could divide it by footages. You could have the north 200 feet of a section or a quarter section. So it's a very efficient system that works very well. But unfortunately, our state is not always divided into little convenient squares. Many parcels in Florida have irregular shapes, so there has to be a system to describe oddly shaped parcels of land. This is where the meets and bounds description, sometimes called perimeter description, comes in. And it describes the subject property by establishing a point on the ground, usually a point of commencement, and then running to a point of beginning, and then proceeding from one point to the next by describing two different bits of information. And when you're running in a straight line, you describe, when you're at one point, you first describe the angle that you're going to go off in to get to the next point. Sometimes that's called a bearing. And then you describe the distance, how far you're going to go. And that takes you to the next point. And then you begin again by establishing the new angle and the new distance going to the next point. And you run from point to point around the boundaries of the description. Now, meets and bounds descriptions are also, there's a different type of meets and bounds, and that is when you simply describe the boundaries of the property. If you had, for instance, a parcel of property bounded on the north by the south line of a road, on the east by the west line of a plat, and so forth, you could simply describe the boundaries, and that's also known as a meets and bounds description. But this is the system that we use, and as you can see, as the more information goes in to these descriptions, the more chance for error that we have. Okay, now we want to go on to a couple of uniform title standards and explain those for you. The first one deals with the sufficiency of a legal description. This title standard is also in your written materials, 21.1, and that standard says that if the description can be located by a surveyor, then it is sufficient. Now, what the standard doesn't say, but Florida law says, is that the surveyor, in locating the description, can use only the description and the surveyor's tools. So if the surveyor has to do a lot of extraneous research, it's probably not a good sufficient description. But where they can locate the property just by the description and the tools of surveying, then you have an adequate description. Now, you'll note here that a tax ID parcel number is not sufficient. It may be helpful in determining the intent, but it doesn't of itself give you an adequate legal description. Now, for poll question 2, we go to Scott McKee.
Thank you, Jerry. All right, for our second poll question, the question is, a street address is a sufficient legal description for, and your options are power of attorneys, devisees, wills and trusts, transfer of title by final judgment of dissolution of marriage, instruments filed in bankruptcy, or E, all of the above. Make your votes now. I would play some Jeopardy music for you, but I don't have that